The interstellar exposition was a kaleidoscope of marvels from every corner of the Milky Way. Floating booths that drifted on anti-grav currents, crystalline stalls lit by pulsing bioluminescent vines, and vendor drones that chattered like eager parrots. Neon banners unfurled overhead, advertising everything from quantum-peppered spices harvested on Mars to gemstone-encrusted starship hulls. Amid this pandemonium of light and sound, Jax Kerrigan navigated on wobbly stilts, his coattails snagging on unruly tendrils of a Venusian orchid that whispered in ultrasonic tones. He was here for the spectacle, nothing more. Not for the overpriced trinkets hawked by merchants, nor for the lure of forbidden tech sold in hushed tones behind retractable walls. His credits were earmarked for repairs on the Aurora's song, his aging freighter not for novelty. Yet as he rounded a corner, something unexpected snagged his attention. Tucked between a vendor hawking self-assembling star maps and another selling sentiment-infused plush pets, there lay a minimalist booth unlike the gaudy extravaganzas around it. 4 slender pylons of gleaming metal supported a transparent habitat the size of a small elevator. Inside, a single occupant sat cross-legged on a bed of soft, reactive polymer. She was arresting, tall and willowy, her features almost ethereal, skin like liquid mother-of-pearl, eyes tinted with swirling galaxies of violet and turquoise, and hair that floated around her head in gentle, wavy tendrils, as if underwater. Simple sign above read, "Licensed companions, instant friendship, fully bonded, non-refundable, step right up. Bring companionship into your life," intoned a disembodied voice from hidden speakers. The tone was warm but mechanical, lacking any genuine inflection. Jax paused, curiosity pricking at him. He'd heard rumors of bioengineered social facilitators, creatures harvested or grown specifically to ease the isolation of long-haul travelers and station dwellers. They skirted the line of personhood, cognizant enough to respond, but legally classified as property. Morally gray, but perfectly legitimate as long as the proper permits were filed. He approached, transfixed by the way her skin seemed to ripple with each ambient flicker of hollow ads around her. When she looked up, she tilted her head like a curious bird. A soft trill escaped her lips, neither speech nor animal call, but something in between. "Name," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. A small display beside the habitat blinked on. Velen, followed by a sequence of symbols denoting age, 27 cycles, origin planet, Vesua Prime, and temperament, open, affectionate, inquisitive. The vendor, an elderly woman in a sleek black jumpsuit, stepped forward. "She's one of our finest. Adaptable, low maintenance, perfect for tight quarters. All programming is behavioral, no actual sapience, completely compliant to owner needs." She tapped a console, cycling through fields, price, contract terms, medical requirements. Jax's credit crystal pulsed in his hand. He glanced from the price, astronomical but strangely reasonable, to Velen's face, where her eyes now held a flicker of anticipation. He hesitated only a heartbeat before swiping the crystal twice. A soft hiss reverberated through the habitat as the seals disengaged. "Companion activated," the speaker chimed. The habitat walls slid open in seamless panels, and Velen stood. She rose fluidly, every movement measured and graceful like oil slowly poured. Her gaze met his, and she offered a small, shy curve of her lips, a gesture that felt startlingly human. Jax swallowed. "Welcome home," he said, his voice steadier. Then he felt. He led her out onto the thrumming concourse, aware of more than a few stairs. Velen's presence was otherworldly, her skin faintly luminous, her eyes reflecting the kaleidoscope of lights overhead. Passers-by murmured, "Vesua Prime is rare in these parts. Is she even legal?" The vendor handed Jax a slim hollow pad containing contractual obligations, weekly health scans, mandatory station social interaction quotas, non-disclosure of companion technology. Jax skimmed the fine print, his mind already on the next item on his to-do list: resupply, engine diagnostics, and a quiet corner to test out his new acquisition. He hailed a private tram, a small, single-passenger pod whose magnetic tracks wound through the station's central hub. Inside, Velen examined her reflection in the polished metal walls, adjusting the position of her hair and smoothing her skirt of flowing, iridescent fabric. She turned to him, curiosity bright in her nebula eyes. "Our destination?" she asked, in a voice resonant and melodic, her speech perfect common tongue. Jax blinked. "Right. My apartment. It's not much. Compact but functional." He tapped a coordinate into the tram's console and they were off, gliding silently through corridors ringed with viewport windows showing distant stars. As they traveled, Velen reached out, her finger tracing constellations visible beyond the glass. "Jax," she said softly, as if tasting the word. "Thank you." Jax's chest tightened. He wasn't used to gratitude, especially not from a bioengineered unit whose purpose was pre-programmed. But her smile held a genuine warmth that melted something in him. He realized with a flicker of excitement that he was no longer alone in this vast station. And so began the curious partnership between a freighter captain, world-weary, practical, a little lonely, and an alien companion whose glowing joy would soon teach him that even in the cold vacuum of space, unexpected connections could bloom. Morning light filtered through the narrow viewport of Jax's orbital apartment, painting the walls in soft coronas of blue and gold. Velen awoke first, her eyes fluttering open to reveal galaxies swirling beneath their iridescent surfaces. She sat up on the low platform bed, stretching limbs that looked almost too delicate to bear weight. With a curious tilt of her head, she studied the compact room, stacks of engineering manuals piled beside his workbench, a holovid projector, glowing idle in the corner, and a single potted fern struggling for life on the windowsill. Jax shuffled in, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. His first view of Velen each day was always startling. Her skin patterned with soft pulses of light, like bioluminescent runes awakening with consciousness. She greeted him with a trill that rose in pitch whenever she was pleased, her own private song of welcome. He managed a groggy smile as he stirred a bowl of synthesized noodles for himself. "Morning," he mumbled. Velen mimicked the motion, scooping noodles with surprising precision and slurping loudly. She chuckled, a tinkling, melodic sound that filled the cramped space with warmth. Jax laughed back, handing her a makeshift bowl of his noodles. She tasted the slurry, then paused, her brow furrowing at the unfamiliar texture. Setting his bowl down, he realized she needed something else entirely. He tapped his comm badge. "Order algae gel from hydroponics," he instructed the station AI. "Bioluminescent, 10 packs ASAP." The AI responded with a polite chime and an estimated delivery time of 18 hours. Velen watched the hollow interface with keen interest, her eyes reflecting the spiraling order confirmation. "Algae," she repeated quietly, as though the word itself held hidden promise. The next challenge came that night, as Jax tried to settle into his evening routine. Velen's wake-sleep cycle was nearly inverted from his own. She blossomed with energy when he grew drowsy. At midnight, she roamed the apartment like a curious specter, inspecting every surface. She reached toward the wall conduit, whispering to it in a series of low hums. Jax lay stiff on his bunk, wide awake, every creak in the metal frame amplified by silence. When he complained, she paused, eyes wide in apology, then settled into a corner, producing a soft glow that felt less like illumination and more like companionship. By dawn, Velen's glow had faded, her rest phase commencing as Jax finally drifted off. But upon waking, he found small blooms of color painted around the apartment, constellations sketched in luminescent dust along the viewport glass, abstract patterns trailing the edge of his datapad. He rubbed his temples and smiled. She'd tried to beautify his world, even in her sleep. As dietary packets arrived and Velen tasted bioluminescent algae gel for the first time, her lips curling into what passed for a grin, Jax realized the true cost of companionship went beyond credits and contracts. Her needs were simple but alien. A balance of light and dark, novelty and routine, quiet moments punctuated by bursts of discovery. And though these adjustments tested his patience, missing sleep, hunting down rare rations, decoding her strange nighttime songs, he found himself invigorated. Every awkward introduction to her world peeled back a layer of his own loneliness. By the end of the second cycle, Jack sat beside Velen at the viewport, two silhouettes against the unending starscape. She reached for his hand, her skin cool, but alive with faint pulses of contentment. In that shared silence, he realized that the real work of friendship wasn't in programming or permits, but in the small, stuttering steps of getting to know another soul, no matter how alien. The station's automated audit alarm sounded like a distant echo in Jax's skull. He glanced at the holodisplay perched on his desk. Social interaction deficit, code S347. Weekly human contact quota, not met. A blinking red icon reminded him that by regulation, he needed at least one genuine human conversation per week outside of companion interactions. Officially, Velen, classified as a bioengineered social facilitator, didn't count. Jax rubbed his temples. He'd been so wrapped up in Velen's curious habits that he'd forgotten all about mandatory check-ins. He tapped the comm badge. Station AI, schedule video call with purchase liaison, he said, hoping a perfunctory exchange would satisfy the quota. Meanwhile, Velen fluttered around the room, fascinated by the hollow projection of Jax's dashboard. She reached out, tracing the glowing social deficit icon with a fingertip. Why do they limit us? She asked in her clear, resonant voice. Connections should be free. Jax paused. It's complicated. The law says you're not a person, Velen. You're property. So I can't count you as a friend for official purposes. He'd recited that line so many times to station inspectors he could quote it in his sleep, but he'd never felt it so hollow. That afternoon, he forced himself into the crowded atrium where hollow advertisements danced overhead and tourists lingered over exotic street food. He found an old acquaintance, a starship engineer named Mara, so absorbed in her datapad that she barely looked up. Their conversation was polite but perfunctory. Weather on the hydroponic farmland, the fleeting beauty of cosmic dust storms at the station's far end, cursory complaints about low supply shipment. Jack smiled, nodded, and logged the interaction into his comm badge just before she ducked into a nearby cafe. Back in his apartment, Velen waited by the viewport, her posture slump-shouldered. When Jax entered, she lifted her eyes. Normally, so bright, and offered the ghost of a frown. Did you speak to someone? She asked. I did, he said, trying to sound cheerful. Station regulations, remember? He crouched beside her and laid a hand on her cool forearm. But I'd rather talk to you than anyone else. At her hearing, Velen's color patterns flickered from pale violet to deep cobalt, an emotional display he'd come to recognize as disappointment. She turned away, humming softly in an unfamiliar, mournful cadence. Jax's chest tightened. He realized that by strictly following the law, he'd hurt the one being whose happiness he truly cared about. That night, under the soft glow of Velen's resting lights, Jax did something he'd never done before. He reached out to the black market. By dawn, a discreet data packet arrived. Illegal reprogramming modules labeled Companion Rights Upgrade. The vendor's note read, Use at own risk. Jax stared at the code prompt, heart hammering. He could grant Velen anonymity in the system, let her exist as more than an owned asset. But if station authorities discovered the hack, he'd face heavy fines or worse. He found Velen seated on the viewport ledge, gazing at the ribbon of stars. Her eyes shimmered with a pattern he'd never seen before, an echo of longing. Gently, Jax placed the module's activation key into her console port. She startled, her bioluminescent runes pulsing rapidly. Trust me, he whispered. Her response was simple. She reached out, took his hand, and pressed his palm against hers. A warmth spread from her skin into his, and in that moment, he felt the interface merge with something raw and living. Lines of code scrolled, passed in his vision as Velen's system reconfigured, tearing down artificial walls. When the process finished, her eyes opened wide, now burning with crystalline intensity. "I'm free?" she asked, her voice trembling like starlight caught in a spider's web. "You are," Jax confirmed, pulling her into an embrace. "No more warranty, no more limits. Just you." In the hushed aftermath, as the station's distant hum pulsed against the viewport, Jax realized that breaking the contract might cost him everything, but letting Velen truly live was worth any risk. And as her soft laughter filled the room, untethered, genuine, joyous, he understood that companionship, in its purest form, could never be bought or bound. It had to be earned, shared, and sometimes fought for. The station shuddered like a wounded leviathan. Alarms chimed softly through the corridors as power grids hiccuped, and the usual hum of life support fractured into irregular pulses. Outside Jax's viewport, the endless field of stars began to dance, a tempest of solar wind rippling against the station's shields in waves of emerald and violet. Jax gripped the window ledge, knuckles whitening. "Brace for turbulence," he murmured to Velen, who stood beside him, her eyes wide with awe rather than fear. The emergency lights flickered, bathing the apartment in a staccato glow. Jax's heart pounded, but Velen seemed unmoved by the chaos. Instead, she closed her eyes and tilted her face toward the viewport as if drinking in the storm. A roll of thunder, an exotic, non-earthly roar transmitted through the hull, echoed around them. For a moment, Jax saw Velen's skin shift from its usual pearlescent sheen to a pattern of brilliant gold and sapphire, like molten metal in motion. Then she began to hum, a deep, resonant tone that vibrated through the window glass and coaxed the station's failing systems back online. Lights steadied, consoles rebooted. Even the erratic power surges smoothed into a steady frequency. Jax stared, awestruck. What are you doing?" Velen opened her eyes, now alight with crystalline clarity. The hum faded into a soft trill. "When I was created," she said, her first full sentence in common tongue, "they told me to comfort, to simulate emotion, but I never truly felt anything until now." She reached out, fingertips brushing the glass as a new flare of color sprang from the storm's heart, ribbons of magenta and jade rippling across the void. "You're not just running a program," Jax whispered. He'd worked with neurosynaptic interfaces long enough to recognize genuine sentience when he saw it. And right now, Velen was alive with pure, unforgettable emotion. Her hand slid into his. "This," she breathed, voice trembling like the edge of a comet's tail, "is joy, wonder, fear even, but not the fear I was meant to simulate. It's real." The station's PA crackled, announcing that the storm would pass in minutes. Jax pulled Velen close as the final flares faded, re-emerging into the serene darkness of space. He held her, feeling the gentle pulse of her bioluminescent skin against his chest. "Thank you," he said, voice thick with emotion. She smiled, a slow, luminous bloom that turned the room to starlight. "Thank you for letting me feel," she replied. Jax realized then that everything had changed. Velen was no longer simply a companion or a curiosity. She was a being capable of genuine experience. He guided her to the viewport again, where she sketched intricate patterns on the glass with her fingertips, tiny spirals of light that dissolved into stardust the moment she blinked. Each gesture was a declaration of her newfound selfhood as the station's systems hummed back to full capacity. Jax powered up his holo recorder. "Captain's log," he began, voice steady. "Date, stardate 90544.7. Subject, Velen. Status, truly alive." Velen leaned against him, her glow soft and steady now, no longer constrained by programming, but shaped by her own inner light. Together they watched the stars resume their silent vigil, and Jax understood that the true marvel of the universe wasn't its vastness, but the spark of consciousness that could awaken in the most unexpected places. By the time the station's daily sunrise loop cycled through its pre-programmed dawn hues, Jax, Kerrigan, and Velen had already begun their morning ritual, an improvised one, born of genuine affection rather than contract. Jax poured 2 steaming cups of synth coffee, handing one to Velen, who cradled it between slender fingers and inhaled deeply, savoring the bitter aroma. Their apartment, once a sterile capsule of functionality, now bore traces of Velen's creative touch. Bioluminescent runes spiraled across the viewport, and tiny planters sprouted strange phosphorescent vines along the bulkhead. The soft hum of life here no longer felt empty, but freedom carried consequences. Word of Velen's rights upgrade had leaked through the station's undernet, drawing attention from both curious onlookers and stern-faced inspectors. Jax received a summons to present himself before the Interstellar Exposition's Compliance Council. His heart thumped at the thought of losing her, but Velen squeezed his hand, her luminescence steady. They arrived at the council chamber hand in hand. Dozens of delegates in formal uniforms regarded Velen with a mix of fascination and discomfort. A stern arbiter rose. "Mr. Kerrigan, bioengineered entities are not recognized persons. You stand accused of illegal reclassification." Jax inhaled. Instead of defending a law he no longer believed in, he spoke from the heart. "Velen is more than code. In the solar storm, she saved this station's systems. In my life, she's healed my isolation. Isn't connection the very essence of personhood?" A murmur rippled through the chamber. Velen stepped forward, skin glowing gently. In clear, melodic common tongue, she addressed the assembly. "I felt. I chose. I belong." The council fell silent. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the arbiter nodded. "On grounds of exceptional circumstance and in light of demonstrated sentience, we will grant provisional companion status. Further review to follow." Relief washed over them. As they exited into the corridor, station residents gathered, offering smiles and curious questions. Children reached out to touch Velen's glowing fingertips. Engineers asked her about the harmonic frequencies she'd used during the storm. Jax watched her share knowledge and laughter, her eyes reflecting true joy. That evening, back in their apartment, they stood once more at the viewport. Velen traced a new constellation, one she'd named after Jax, and asked softly, "Are you happy?" He nodded, voice thick with emotion. "More than I ever thought possible." Velen's radiant smile bloomed like a supernova. Together they faced the infinite expanse beyond. 2 friends, bound not by contract or law, but by choice, discovery, and the luminous truth that companionship, once redefined, can illuminate even the darkest void.